Hive cities are the worst place to live in the Imperium. Vertical mazes of plasteel and concrete, pollution, corruption, extreme overcrowding, unchecked gang violence, forgotten sunlight, endless noise, endless factories, endless industry. Is this really an accurate description of life in a hive city? Yes, for many it is. So, are hive cities the absolute worst place to live in the Imperium of Man? Definitely not. We are offered a new, refreshing perspective of life in a hive city through the new, appropriately named series, Hive, by the first and only Dan Abnett, a perspective that almost works to challenge some of the more stereotypical understandings of life in a hive city. The hive is everything to a hive dweller. Literally, the hive is their world. It is all that is. There is only the hive. Everything else is without. And being forced without is the worst punishment imaginable. The worst criminals receiving the harshest sentences, those worthy of penance and punishment beyond torture and death, are banished without. Shamed publicly, stripped of their identity, and forced to make whatever life they can, for as long as they can, in the ruination outside of the hive, outside of their world. Hive cities themselves are truly enormous, and most will know this. From beyond the clouds to beneath the earth, hive cities are large enough to be seen from orbit, dirty blemishes on worlds being slowly poisoned, sucked dry of everything they have to feed or power the very tumors that are sure to kill them in time. People flow through the hive, of day and of night, like blood through a body. Of any hour, there was always someone moving, going to some place or coming back from another. Many rode in vehicles, forming great columns of slow-moving trucks and carts in the ever-present haze. Most went on foot. Someone was always going somewhere. Sacramentus, the hive of Hive, are you confused yet? Though known by that name only to off-worlders, is home to some 90 billion souls. Even smaller hives on the same world, housing 1/10 of that number, are staggering by any other measure, and yet they are not above eyeing their larger siblings with jealousy or resentment. The resources that allow for the growth and relative stability achieved by Sacramentus are worth coveting, and, on some occasions, worth going to war over. The scale of the hive reality demands a new way of thinking about space. Residents navigate not just across their city, but through it, tracking what they call vertics and zontals, the vertical and horizontal axes of hive life, much as how one might track latitude and longitude across a planet's surface because, again, the hive is their planet. But what about life in the hive? What is this new perspective found in this new release? Well, before we get to that, we have to understand, as I have said before and will say again, life in a hive city in the Imperium is a study in contrast. In many cities of the second millennium, wealth and social standing usually divided people horizontally. The rich and wealthy would cluster around and claim this part and that, the good parts really, while the middle class fill the parts radiating outward from them, and the working class settle wherever they can afford, often out toward the factories, the edges, and the in-between places that nobody else really wanted. It is, broadly speaking, and with more than a few exceptions, loose wealth-based segregation spread out across a flat plain, like the rings of a target viewed from above. Hive society completely goes against this. The upper class still claim the best of it, the middle class take what's somewhat comfortable and livable, the rest sink to what's left. But unlike the more traditional cities that all would recognize, a hive city sorts its people vertically. Not east or west, not metro or regional, but up or down. Elevation is everything. Hive loosely divides Sacramentus into 4 layers, bottom to top. At the bottom is the neg, a name the old hivers will tell you in the way of stories too old to verify, was once an abbreviation of negative space, meaning everything below the crust of the world, inclusive of what outsiders would call the underhive. Though most who call the neg their home couldn't even tell you what ground level is, the concept of a planet's crust, of Earth, of anything without, is as foreign to them as long division is to an Ogrin. The world of the neg is one of claustrophobic tunnels choked with rock dust and grit, of ceilings propped up by hydraulic presses shouldering the unthinkable weight above, of chasms and deep canyons, rough-cut chambers and heavy industry. Miners, cutters, diggers, stirrers, and 1,000 other types of toil bonds, these are the people of the neg. Above the neg sits the low, the broad sprawling base of the hive and home to the overwhelming majority of its people, the lonely, hopeless individuals. This is where the city is at its widest and its most crowded. Hab zones piled on top of hab zones, hab rows upon hab rows, long streets of unbroken human traffic 5 minutes wide, warrens of narrow alleys and busy market corridors, rats and vermin, gangs and pickpockets, factories, processing plants, and the endless churn of hooded and cloaked people going about the daily business of surviving in the low, totally ignorant of the fact that almost all of them will never leave it or know anything of life outside of it. Higher still is the Overmuch, which takes up the middle levels and is home to the middle classes of hive society, the more livable, if not quite comfortable, band of hive existence. The streets are narrower than those above, but they are clean and breathable. The air flushes are regular enough to notice when they're late. Cafes line the thoroughfares and plazas alongside the workshops of craftsmen and artisans, the offices of minor officials and merchants, the studios of artists who have just enough patronage to keep on working. Life in the Overmuch is life that allows for something beyond just labour and survival, and that is no small thing. At the very top sits the Overmost. Glass spires and marble halls, manicured gardens and domed estates where the air is clean, the quiet is deliberate, and the light is real. Not the sterile light of lumen strips, nor the dull bleed of poorly maintained light wells, but actual sunlight, beaming gently through curved glass onto people who rarely concern themselves with the realities of what lies beneath their feet. The upper class, nobility, and rulers of the hive live here, above the factories, above the hab zones, above the tunnels, and above the dark. They look down on everything below them, which is also to say, everyone. Most of this is familiar territory. Hive doesn't reinvent the Hive City so much as it fleshes one out more fully than most. But there are a few things I think are worth flagging, details that change or refresh what we think we know about hives, before we look to explore just one more average Joe Imperium perspective explored in Hive that scratches the itch for the nitty-gritty of hive life better than almost anything I've come across. First off, we see food, or more specifically, where it comes from. Hive doesn't focus on the act of eating so much as the production behind it, and what it shows did genuinely surprise me. Gone is the hearsay and short slop about commonplace corpse starch and cannibalism. I want to hear nothing more about hivers sucking on rusted pipes and sipping on radiated runoff. Hive gives us something very rarely thought of in the same breath as a hive city: farmland. Grassy and mossy pastures tended by farmers and shepherds, herds of livestock grazing on the skin of the hive beneath great glass domes. The primary livestock farmed in such environments are called donts, large beasts, quadrupeds, hunch-shouldered and flabby though lean at the hind part. They were raised for meat and cure, for pelts, and even their bones and offal could be rendered for slab or starch. Beyond the livestock, there is also a great focus on wet bed fungus farming, stretching across the skirts of the hive, hundreds of miles of standing water and hive rain runoff, huge open agri-spaces are tended by hermit-like agribonds who cultivate varieties of fungus and mushroom, white belly, pink lobe, and blackbud, to name a few local favourites. The quantity produced is impressive too, with enough surplus cultivated to be shipped without and off-world. This is a serious industry for Sacramentus, serious enough that even the stiff-nosed, powder-faced nobles of the Overmost are said to pay top throne for the delicacies that crop up from those very same wetbeds. Livestock, meat, slab, starch, and fungus, Sacramentus has more on the local menu than you might expect, all things considered. And while the more premium end of this local produce, black bud chief among them, sits beyond the reach of the average hive dweller, the rest is very much accessible to most. Don't starch, meaty white belly, and their many variations turn up in soups, stews, and broths across the levels, affordable enough that most can get their hands on something resembling a decent meal, and often supplemented with the more traditional, artificial, or imported items of imperial nutrition. And where would one fill their bellies with such sweet treats? At low market stalls and wagons, cook shops, or even, dare I say, banquet halls for those with the throne to spend? Yes, very much so, but also at the pub. Pubs, bars, and other such drinking establishments make an appearance at every level of the hive, from the neg to the overmost, and they are rarely empty. After shift, on sleepless nights, at the annual reunion of close co-workers who used to share a room and now barely share a level, the local pub is a constant. It is another of those details that pushes back against the drier stereotypes that so often plague understandings of the average hive dweller's existence. The idea that a hive dweller exists only to work, sleep, and repeat. People find meaning outside of work. They meet people. They form long-lasting relationships, they get married, have kids, and are rewarded with better accommodations. A double-sized hab, for example, as a result. A wed couple would qualify for a double occupancy hab, perhaps a better one on a higher zontal, as bringing a new bond into the hive was considered the throne's work, for a baby would one day toil too. Hivers do in fact live a life of meaning in the margins, however narrow, between labour and sleep. There is a strong sense of community here, there is culture, there is, apparently, a very good reason to stay for just one more drink. The last thing I want to address on stereotypes, and I've touched on it quickly already, is light. When you picture a hive city, you would be forgiven for imagining a gloomy, dank industrial hellscape. You would be forgiven for assuming sunlight is a foreign concept to most hive dwellers because, in many cases, it is. But not in Sacramentus, and perhaps not in many others. Sacramentus is lighter than you might expect. Throughout the hive, great light wells are sunk through its many levels, massive lenses wide enough that crossing one on foot would take the better part of 2 minutes, angled to capture and beam real diffuse sunlight down through the layered spans of the hive and its hive skin into the deeper levels below. Variations exist too, light wells that collect and store sunlight during the day in batteries to continue bleeding soft light through the hive long into the night. Many work crews and labour gangs are wholly dedicated to their maintenance, repair and preservation, which is no small feat given the complexity and scale of keeping such infrastructure clean and functional across the many vertics and zontals of the hive. Their importance to the people of Sacramentus is difficult to overstate. It is, for most, the closest thing to nature they will ever know. Now, let's put a face to all of this and explore that new Joe Imperium perspective I promised earlier. Meet Stanton Feng, a 26-year-old toil bond living in the low. A tall, thin man with jutting cheekbones and a long, sharp nose, yet just another downcast, hooded face among the millions of others, and as statistically average of a hive dweller as you are likely to find. Ulthen had a bad start to his day. He had slept poorly, choked through a breathless dream, and awoke with a stabbing headache behind his left eye, bad enough to kill his appetite entirely, despite his body's ravenous urge to eat. He went to work anyway, like the dedicated soul he is, arriving among the throng of his shift mates at the Kronzoll plant, his place of work, and took his place on the line. Ulthen's job is to process and pack the mineral powders hoisted up from the neg, readying them to be sent onwards to the furnaces for further processing. Hard work and unhealthy work, for the powders have a tendency to hang in the air as coloured dust, turning the light around the line to the same coloured hue. Dust lung was a common ailment and saw many to early graves. On this particular day, however, Ulthen's own illness got the better of him. He couldn't focus, couldn't stay on the line without stepping away for fear of vomiting into the powders he packed. His overseer Litvig, concerned, though more so about the productivity loss, sent him home as a result. This was a big deal. Ulthen was betrothed to Euphema and had a baby on the way. And if a bond missed 4 shifts, they were cut from the toil list and their productivity record was marked, and they'd have to find a new place at a different plant and explain why they had lost the last. Ulthen's home sat within the area of 10 South Low, a place where narrow causeways and ginnels wound between hab rises stacked as tight and high as cartons in a packing house. The light was dim and green, the noise never stopped, the footsteps, the voices, the bursts of shouting and squabble, the infants crying. He returned then, sick and worried, to his home. No, not a home actually, and not a hab either, a habicule. A tiny dirty cell, 6 by 6 by 6, single occupancy, a curl bunk, a piss pot, and a small high shelf of possessions. No doors, oh no, there are only holes of ragged brick on opposing walls, opening not into a corridor or foyer, but directly into the habicules of his neighbours, the whole arrangement divided by nothing more than dirty plastic curtains. Their space was Ulthen's hallway, his space was theirs. Tenants passed through at all hours, no words spoken, no eye contact made, just the sound of curtains parting, footsteps making a half-hearted attempt at quiet, and then stillness again, for a while at least, until the next neighbour came through. A tiny cell, no privacy, a bed only large enough to curl up, knees to chest, like a baby, a piss pot, a water jug, a single shelf, and that's it. That is Ulthen's home, and it is where he ends the day, praying to wake up feeling whole again. And you should pray for Ulthen too, because that is where I will leave his story, with high hopes that he does wake up feeling better and all returns to normal for him, no further comment. Dan Abnett gives with one hand and takes with the other. The broader picture presented by Sacramentus in Hive challenges quite a few of the bleaker assumptions and stereotypes about Hive life, the food, the community, the light. And then there is Ulthen and his living situation. Well, some stereotypes exist for a reason, I guess. Anyway, Dan Abnett has done it again. Hive is a genuinely great read, especially for those who do appreciate this kind of insight into the day-to-day realities of life in the Imperium, so I do recommend picking up a copy yourself and giving it a read. Well worth picking up. Anyway, thanks for watching. Dystopian Chimp out.